All right, thank you very much for joining us. Saying you're the audience, and we are really excited about this program. Has been the Curator of Collections and Exhibitions at the Erie Canal Museum in Syracuse, New York, and holds degrees in philosophy from Hood College and applied history from Shippensburg University. Ashley has worked for historical in Pennsylvania, Arkansas, and Kansas. She has recently left the Erie Canal Museum to embark venture, that of being named the executive director of the St. Lawrence County Historical Association. Excited as we're celebrating New York State History Month to learn more from Ashley about the life and times of. So Ashley, it is all you.
Okay, very nice introduction. Thank you, Dave. Well, this is very interesting. Giving one of these curator talks as no longer a member of the staff of the Erie Canal Museum. Yesterday was my last day, and next Tuesday is going to be my first day as executive director of the St. Lawrence County Historical Association. That said, I'm a huge fan of politics, and especially New York politics, and I'm really happy that I get to stay in New York as I continue my career because I've lived all over the place, but New York is the first state that's really felt like home. So I'm presenting from my living room. So if you see a cat on camera, don't be alarmed. They really like to come alive when when I'm on camera, when I'm doing a Zoom meeting or something or presentation. I guess they don't think that they get enough attention normally. I don't know. They're currently chasing each other around, so you may see one. I'll try to avoid letting it distract me, but I just wanted to give you guys the heads up. So let's get started. Today, I'm going to tell you about DeWitt Clinton. He was a native New Yorker and a consummate politician, and he coordinated the effort to get the original Erie Canal constructed beginning in 1817. But as we'll learn today, he was more than just the political spearhead of the Erie Canal. So we'll start at the very, very beginning. DeWitt was born on March 2nd, 1769 in Little Britain, New York, an area which is now in the town of New Windsor, which is way downstate in Orange County. He was born to Mary DeWitt and Major General James Clinton. James Clinton was a Revolutionary War officer who had helped lead the 1779 Sullivan Expedition. DeWitt was educated at Princeton University and then Columbia University and became a lawyer, and he was admitted to the bar in 1790. Here is a nice woodcut image of his birthplace. So DeWitt Clinton came from a very famous family. He had some famous relatives, including his brother George Clinton Jr., who was a member of Congress. His half-brother James G. Clinton was another congressman. His cousin Simeon DeWitt was the Surveyor General of the state of New York. This is an 1804 survey map that was created by Simeon DeWitt. So as you can see, this was a family tree that was very firmly rooted in the fortunes and future of New York State. At the tender age of 21, DeWitt Clinton entered the rough and tumble world of politics, serving as the secretary for yet another famous relative, his uncle George Clinton, from 1790 to 1795. George Clinton was then serving as the governor of New York, and he would remain New York's governor for 9 terms. DeWitt Clinton joined the Democratic Republican Party and would become a political force to reckon with for the duration of his life. So I'm going to a little bit of 19th century political history here because I think it's really fascinating. The Democratic Republicans were a party that were founded by Thomas Jefferson and James Madison in the early 1790s to oppose the policies of the Federalist Party. They were considered the first quote-unquote Republican Party in U.S. history, and they are also known as the Jeffersonian Republicans. They espoused state power over that of the federal government, and they were a lot more prominent in the South than in the Northeast, and DeWitt Clinton's uncle George Clinton had a big role in the party before his nephew did. So they controlled the U.S. presidency as well as the Congress from 1801 to 1825, and they had taken over from the Federalist Party, who of course believed in more centralized federal government power. After this period, they splintered into the Jacksonian movement, which became the Democratic Party in 1828, and the National Republican Party, which was then succeeded by the Whig Party. Their opposition, the Federalist Party, was considered elitist and disappeared altogether after about 1815. So thank you very much for bearing with me on this little political interlude. So under the banner of the Democratic Republicans, Clinton became a member of the New York State Assembly in 1798, and then he served in the New York State Senate from 1798 to 1802, and then again from 1806 to 1811. He was a delegate to the New York State Constitutional Convention in 1801. He was a member of the Council of Appointments from 1801 to 1802, and then 1806 to 1807. He was elected to the U.S. Senate, and he served from February 9th, 1802 to November 4th, 1803, and then resigned. He was unhappy with the living conditions and the social scene in Washington, D.C., who wants to hang out with a bunch of government officials. I have to admit that learning this about Clinton made me laugh because I am actually a D.C. area native, and I too prefer New York to D.C. So Clinton was appointed mayor of New York City, and he served from 1803 to 1815, save for 2 annual terms. This was a total of 10 one-year terms, 1803 to 1807, 1808 to 1810, and then 1811 to 1815. Clinton's powers as mayor were not to be overlooked. I mean, even today, mayor of New York City is a significant political office. He was in charge of appointing employees for many city positions, and he served as the presiding judge for the Court of Common Pleas. He was very active in the city's fire department. He supervised performance and also helped to create the very first fire insurance company. He was in charge of the police force, and he helped to put down a few local riots. Yellow fever was a recurring epidemic in several American cities in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. And when it hit New York City in 1809, Clinton stayed in the city and worked, unlike a lot of other officials who fled to Greenwich. Some other accomplishments as mayor for DeWitt Clinton included advocacy for free and widespread public education, reform of criminal laws, sanitation improvements, the establishment of public welfare institutions around the city, including a free hospital for the insane, which would later become Bellevue Hospital, as well as the promotion of legislation removing voting and other restrictions against Roman Catholics. Clinton's time as the mayor of New York City was also marked by a fervent interest in the arts and humanities. Clinton was a scholar, and with his own drive and the power of his office, he helped to create the New York State Historical Society in 1804, which was New York's first museum. He helped reorganize the American Academy of the Fine Arts in 1808 and served as regent for the University of the State of New York from 1808 to 1825. He was elected as a member of the American Antiquarian Society in 1814 and served as their vice president from 1821 to 1828. He was elected a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences in 1816. I think he'd be really proud of the amazing museums in New York that we have today. So in 1811, during Clinton's tenure as mayor of New York City, the lieutenant governor of New York, a man named John Broome, died. A special election was held, and Clinton was elected and ended up holding this office until the end of the term in June of 1813. And then finally, we got to try and take on the presidency here. In 1812, Clinton was approached for a presidential run against the incumbent president and fellow Democratic Republican James Madison. Clinton was nominated by the New York caucus of the party after war was declared. He was attempting to create a coalition of pro-war Democratic Republicans and anti-war Federalists. His running mate was Jared Ingersoll of Pennsylvania, a Federalist lawyer. The Federalists did not field a candidate themselves. And here is Jared Ingersoll of Pennsylvania. So the election of 1812 was the 7th overall presidential election and occurred in the shadow of the War of 1812, the first election to be held during a major war involving the U.S. Clinton changed his campaign strategy depending on his location, holding an anti-war stance in the Northeast and a pro-war stance in the South and West. Of course, a politician today would be accused of flip-flopping were they to employ such a strategy now. So the strategy was actually a really interesting one, and it very nearly paid off, as the 1812 election was the closest of the period of 1800 to 1824. Clinton ended up attracting a lot of Federalist support, along with the support of Northern Democratic Republicans who were tired of the Southern, and especially Virginian, domination of their party and of the presidency. I've got a map for you. This is the breakdown. Madison won both the Electoral College as well as the popular vote. He got 128 electoral votes to Clinton's 89 and carried 11 states to Clinton's 7. The split of the popular vote was 50.4% for Madison and 47.6% for Clinton, which is quite a good showing, I think. Pennsylvania in particular was contested, with its 25 electoral votes in contention for a whole month amidst numerous recounts. So while he did not ultimately succeed in national politics, DeWitt Clinton was elected governor of New York in 1817, after sitting governor Daniel D. Tompkins left the office to become vice president to James Monroe. Technically, Clinton was the only candidate, but almost 1,500 votes were cast for Peter Buell Porter, who was backed by New York political machine Tammany Hall. Tammany Hall hated DeWitt Clinton and had printed and distributed ballots with Porter's name on them. Clinton was an enemy of Tammany because of his assertion that Aaron Burr, who was the first real leader of the organization, who took it from a speech-making society to an active political machine, had conspired to beat Thomas Jefferson in the presidential election of 1800. Ostensibly, the Democratic Republicans were running Jefferson for president and Burr for vice president, but the two men received the same number of votes in the Electoral College, which had to be revoted upwards of 30 times before Jefferson finally emerged as the winner and Burr became vice president. This was the start of the nastiness that eventually led to Burr's illegal duel with Alexander Hamilton, in which Hamilton was shot and killed. In the wake of the 1800 election, Burr was basically shut out of the business of the party and lost the trust of Thomas Jefferson. Clinton's own history with Tammany was also influenced by his uncle, George Clinton, who reviled Aaron Burr and sought to position his nephew to break up the Burr-loving faction of their party. So there's a lot of political nastiness at work here. Clinton was in office for a first 3-year term and then ran again and was reelected in 1820, serving until 1822. Clinton's political fortunes faltered during this time as the New York State Constitutional Convention of 1821 shortened the gubernatorial term to only 2 years and moved the term beginning to January 1st, cutting off the last 6 months of Clinton's second term. So he was not renominated for the 1822 election, which must have come as a serious blow. During this time, Clinton served as president of the Erie Canal Commission, overseeing the ongoing canal project. Clinton's political enemies, the Bucktails, who were a faction of the Democratic Republicans that were influenced by Tammany Hall and therefore hated Clinton, agitated for and voted in the state legislature for his removal from the commission. Okay, Ferris, that's enough. So this was a bad move on their part, as Clinton was nominated and reelected for governor in 1824 by the People's Party, in opposition to the official Democratic Republican candidate, Samuel Young, who was also on the Canal Commission. What did I say before? He was reelected in 1826 and served as New York governor until his death in 1828. This perhaps illustrates better than anything else how Clinton's political fortunes were linked to his role as the spearhead of the Erie Canal. So now at last we have come to DeWitt Clinton's biggest claim to fame, the Erie Canal. That's him at the base of the structure pictured here, the Erie Canal supporters. So the idea of a canal to unite the East Coast with the interior of the country was not a new one. Before the Revolutionary War, George Washington expressed concerns about the loss of lands west of the Appalachian Mountains to the French or Canadians, or both, because there really wasn't a land connection there. After the war, Washington organized the Potomac Company to turn the Potomac River into a canal running from the coast up to the mountains. This project was a financial disaster and was still under construction by Washington's death in 1799. It was an achievement in engineering, however. At around the same time, talk had begun a canal project through New York State, where geography was more favorable than that of Virginia. But it took a few decades to kind of get the project and get all the ideas together. There were questions about the engineering problems of such a project, not to mention the question of funding something that wasn't necessarily guaranteed to be able to pay its own way. And there were also a lot of questions about the route to be taken. While it would have been easier to create a shorter route to Lake Ontario, this plan wouldn't gain as much access to the Midwest. And as relations with the British declined leading up to the War of 1812, this plan was abandoned as they controlled Canada. In 1809, Thomas Jefferson called the prospect of building a canal through the state of New York little short of madness, which is probably my favorite Jefferson quote. He loved the idea, but he didn't think that it was actually going to be possible. This was the prevailing national opinion, and so the prospects for federal funding of such a canal were unlikely, unfortunately. So why did New York need a canal anyway? Overland travel across the state of New York to the interior of the country was really difficult, and it was bordering on impossible during some times of the year. I mean, even today we know how hard it can be to get around upstate New York in the winter especially. While the population of the young United States had rapidly increased, it went from 3.9 million in 1790 to 6.3 million just 15 years later in 1805. This means of transportation that they had at the time were obsolete and a detriment to continued growth. The roads consisted of old Indian trails. They'd been widened and packed down with dirt. They could be really dusty in summer heat and swampy in cold and wet weather, especially during spring thaw, mud season. Winters in New York were, of course, no less brutal at the start of our nation's history than they are now. And in really marshy areas, the roads had logs set across them with dirt in between, which was an attempt at kind of smoothing out the route. These were called corduroy roads. You know, they were bumpy. Waterways across the state often lacked bridges to connect the roads from one side to the other, which made cargo passage difficult. In 1800, it took a few weeks to travel overland from New York City to Cleveland. New York's geography is favorable to a canal across our state. The Mohawk Valley forms a natural pathway through the Catskill and Adirondack Mountains, so it made sense that a canal should be constructed through the state this way. And in the 18th and 19th centuries, Europe was also having a canal mania. And this meant that successful canals were being built in France, Germany, and Britain. The War of 1812 also showed the need for a better way to transport across the state and to connect to the Great Lakes and the rest of the country at that time. The movement of equipment and men and horses was slow and expensive and difficult. And of course, the war also showed the importance of developing markets for American goods at home in America. What concrete advantages would a canal give over, say, a better system of roads? Canal technology seems really primitive to us now in the 21st century, this age of self-driving cars and supersonic jet travel. But in the 19th century, canals were an incredible technological innovation. They were flat and calm, unlike rivers, and it was easy for a boat to carry large amounts of cargo over water as opposed to over land, especially considering those roads at the time. Canal boats were not yet motorized, and there was control over speed and steering by way of the captain on board and the driver leading the animals, which would have been mules or horses, pulling the boat by way of the towpath. The cost of shipping cargo on a canal as opposed to overland was also vastly less, and it would become incredibly profitable to move more and more items to market this way. Not to mention the advantage of moving people via canal. I was with the Erie Canal Museum for a little over 4 years, and I talked to so many visitors to the museum whose families ended up in the Midwest, Illinois and Michigan and Ohio, by way of the Erie Canal. This is a postcard from the Erie Canal Museum's collection, and it shows the calm, serene, enlarged Erie Canal near Schenectady. So the prevailing attitude amongst Americans of the 19th century was that their creator had provided the tools, setting, and intelligence necessary to undertake such a project, so why not do it? This is an 1809 map of New York from the Erie Canal Museum. An early proponent was one Jesse Hawley, who was a flour merchant tasked with moving flour from western New York, where Rochester would later become famous as the Flour City, to New York City. He discussed the idea of a canal to Lake Erie with later surveyor of the project, James Geddes. Hawley's own fortunes would have been vastly improved by the creation of such a canal. The summer high toll charges on his overland trips cut into his profits and drove him into debt, and he ended up fleeing New York for Pittsburgh to elude his creditors, but then returned in 1807 and spent 20 minutes in Canandaigua in a debtor's prison. He ended up writing 14 essays on the subject of this canal idea under the pen name of Hercules. These were published in the Genesee Messenger, which was a Canandaigua newspaper. The essays are detailed and well thought out. He's got cost estimates and even comparisons to European canals. Hawley put into words the concrete notion of a canal across New York State and in turn inspired the canal fever that soon swept up fervor among New York politicians, including DeWitt Clinton. So at the time, New York was exploding in population even before the canal. By 1810, there were 959,000 people in New York State, a jump from 589,000 in 1800. And New York City had reached 125,000 and had become the largest city in the country. It's funny to be sitting in Syracuse, which has a population of about 140,000. The canal project might not have been popular on a national scale, but it seemed possible that the state of New York could fund it. DeWitt Clinton came to be the political spearhead of the Erie Canal project, and it came to be known derisively as Clinton's Big Ditch because of his involvement. Clinton entered the canal story in 1810 when he was asked to join the commission to explore a route for a canal to Lake Erie and report, which eventually became the Erie Canal Commission. Clinton would serve on this commission until 1824. So at the time, he was New York's most powerful politician. It seemed like a natural move that he would be asked to join this. The commission members traveled the proposed canal route for the purposes of research and survey. Clinton kept a journal of the trip, which discussed all manner of subjects along with the business of the canal idea itself, history, geology, and even ornithology, as he cataloged birds seen along the Mohawk River. The trip across the state west and back took 53 days, and from this trip, the Canal Commission would put together a report to the state legislature. But before the canal could become reality, there were literal and figurative battles to be fought. The War of 1812, in particular, was a huge stumbling block. It interrupted the progress of the plan for several years, and a few attempts to secure additional funding from the federal government would fall short. The Erie Canal was to be a New York project through and through. Clinton had the intellectual authority to turn the idea of a canal into reality. and he was capable of garnering such popular support for the project that his political enemies would be unable to oppose the project itself. So instead, they moved to attack him, and somehow also made themselves out to look as if they were in favor of the project. So that's interesting. You're in favor of the project that this guy you hate is a proponent for, but you want to turn opinion against him. 1861 preliminary legislative support for the canal, and the state legislature demanded complete plans for the project, including route, means of construction, and how it was going to be financed. Clinton presided over the commission during this planning process. The work was to be divided into three sections. The Western Division, which was 165 miles from Lake Erie to the Seneca River. The Middle Division, 72 miles from the Seneca River to Rome. And the Eastern Division, 126 miles from Rome to Albany. Engineering the project was a concern, and at the time there were no professional engineers in this country, and the canal was created by talented amateurs, such as James Geddes, who oversaw the Western Division, and Benjamin Wright, who oversaw the Middle Division. Charles Broadhead was the amateur engineer assigned to the Eastern Division. Canvas White, who was another amateur engineer, joined them in this process and ended up traveling to Great Britain to cover 2,000 miles of English Canal on foot, learning and studying in order to bring that knowledge back to New York. So how are they going to pay for this project? New York State ended up issuing bonds and taxing land, salt, and other items to repay the $7 million in debt that the canal would generate for the state. Many small investors contributed money to the cause at the beginning, and as the work progressed, richer parties got involved as well. In early 1817, after several years of campaigning, planning, and strategizing by DeWitt Clinton and the Canal Commission, not to mention the War of 1812, the state legislature passed a Canal Act. Construction officially began July 4th, 1817, just 3 days after Clinton took office as New York's governor on July 1st. So as you know, Clinton's political fortunes rose and fell during the canal construction period, but his triumphant return as New York's governor near the end of construction meant that he got to lead the official opening ceremony known as the Wedding of the Waters. This began October 26, 1825, and it was the first complete voyage on the newly completed canal. It took 9 days. Clinton was on the lead boat. On the morning of November 4th, the boats arrived in Albany and then headed south on the Hudson towards New York City. When they arrived, Clinton poured a keg of Lake Erie water into the Atlantic, thereby completing the symbolic Wedding of the Waters. He made this speech on this occasion. This solemnity at this place, on the first arrival of vessels from Lake Erie, is intended to indicate and commemorate the navigable communication, which has been accomplished between our Mediterranean seas and the Atlantic Ocean in about 8 years to the extent of more than 425 miles by the wisdom, public spirit, and energy of the state of New York, and may the God of heavens and earth smile most propitiously on the work and render it subservient to the best interests of the human race. This was such an accomplishment. The Erie Canal has seen 3 major incarnations. The original canal, constructed from 1817 to 1825, which is now often affectionately called Clinton's Ditch. It was 40 feet wide and 4 feet deep and stretched over 363 miles, 83 locks. It cut travel time across the state down to just 6 to 11 days, when previously it had taken weeks to get across the state of New York. The canal was later enlarged between the 1830s and 1860s, and it was then taken to 70 feet wide and 7 feet deep. They also took 15 miles out of the length by straightening various sections of it. Improvements and additional enlargements were made before the original canal was replaced by the New York State Barge Canal in 1918. This is still the Erie Canal, but it is wider and makes use of rivers and lakes along the way across the state. Some parts of the Western Division are still man-made, as there was a lack of suitable natural waterways. These man-made sections are wider and deeper than the original canal, including many sections of the original canal, including the one that passed through Syracuse, where I am, were closed and abandoned and sometimes paved over. That's what happened here. The system of canals running across the state of New York were and are a huge part of the story of New York history, and DeWitt Clinton's efforts and advocacy for this project should never be forgotten. DeWitt Clinton is also notable as a standard bearer of the fraternal order known as Freemasonry. In 1806, he was elected Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of New York, a post he held until 1819. He helped to establish the Grand Encampment of the Knights Templar in the U.S. and was their first, second, and third Grand Master, spanning from 1818 to 1828. And DeWitt Clinton was the governor of New York during the notorious Morgan Affair in 1826. This interesting bit of cold case history began when a man by the name of William Morgan, who claimed to have been a Mason, stated that he intended to publish a book exposing their secrets, titled Illustrations of Freemasonry. Morgan was based in Batavia, New York at the time, and soon disappeared under suspicious circumstances, and no trace of him was ever found. It was surmised that the Masons had kidnapped and murdered him. This spurred a wave of anti-Masonic feelings, including a political movement against them called the Anti-Masonic Party. Clinton himself offered a reward of $1,000 for information on Morgan's whereabouts or demise, but it was never claimed. Turning a little bit to Clinton's personal life now, DeWitt Clinton was married twice. In 1796, he married Maria Franklin and ended up having 10 children with her. 4 sons and 3 daughters survived to at least to the time of her death in 1818. One of his sons, George William Clinton, went on to become the mayor of Buffalo, the Queen City, which came to be as a result of the Erie Canal. In 1819, Clinton remarried to Catherine Jones, who then survived him. Clinton died suddenly on February 11, 1828, while he was in Albany. Unfortunately, in spite of his capable political leadership of the state, he did not have the financial acumen to handle his own financial affairs, and as a result left his family in poor financial condition, with creditors beating down their door. Most of the family possessions were sold publicly to satisfy the claims of his creditors, and there was no money left to bury Clinton. He was given a state funeral, but there was no gravesite purchased. Clinton's remains were kept in the family vault of a friend and fellow Mason, Dr. Samuel Stringer of Albany. After 16 years here, the Clinton family was financially able to correct this, and he was reinterred at the Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn, New York. He has a grand memorial there. Here's some images that I found of his memorial. So DeWitt Clinton left behind a major legacy. Beyond the unparalleled accomplishment of shepherding the Erie Canal project from start to finish, there are multiple towns and schools named for DeWitt Clinton, including 3 different iterations of Clinton, New York, including one in Clinton County, New York. Columbia University, which one of Clinton's alma maters, created a DeWitt Clinton Professorship of American History in 1926. This image is cool. This is a glass flask that dates to about 1825. I just thought it was neat. DeWitt Clinton also appeared on a United States note issue of 1880 in the $1,000 denomination. And for being kind of an amateur naturalist, he even has a plant named after him, Clintonia borealis, which is also known as Clinton's lily. Here's the DeWitt Clinton statue at the New York Chamber of Commerce building. Although DeWitt Clinton's forays and attempted forays into national politics were brief, and his real political accomplishments were tied to the state of New York, I find it interesting that his most notable endeavor, the Erie Canal, was not just a win for the state, but a win for the fledgling nation as a whole. If not for DeWitt Clinton, we probably wouldn't be here today. Me by way of the Erie Canal Museum, which is a museum dedicated to his pet project, and I'm in the city of Syracuse, which also became a city because of the Erie Canal. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ashley.
Dave, I don't know.
Great. I'm gonna. What's that?
There you are.
I'm gonna ask if anybody has any questions. I did get one from Hal. He's just curious if you happen to have any idea a cost would be for a captain that's going to be traversing the length of the canal.
I don't, unfortunately. I expect that you would have to go into personal record keeping from some of these captains in order to piece that together. Those documents, I'm sure they exist. I don't know that I've ever personally encountered them, though.
That sounds like a project. Yeah. Asking if visitors to the Erie Canal Museum often knew who DeWitt Clinton was, or if they found out about him when he was on tour, when they were on tour at the museum.
I'd like to think that we do a pretty good job of educating visitors about who he is if they don't already know. I would say if they have some grounding in New York State history initially, they probably do know who he is, because he was a pretty prominent figure in the history of the state, for sure. Clintonia borealis, named after his son who started the Science Museum in Buffalo. Okay, then. Well, there you go. Another famous relative.
Nice. Yeah, the Clintons were all over in early New York history. glad you made some comments about the politics in New York, and I've always kind of thought it was interesting, particularly you have the 1790s into even the 1840s. The politics in New York State were, just it's fascinating, and it's politics of personality. Everybody's kind of emerging and trying to develop a sense of what New York State is going to look like, parties are going to look like, in the early American Republic. So I just find that really fascinating, and there's probably an entire different program that could be done about Tammany Hall and its relationship and even Masonic movement. So, you had mentioned Aaron Burr and the Hamilton duel, and short video up on the Schoharie Crossing Facebook back when there was the anniversary of that about DeWitt Clinton. I don't know if you've done any additional research into that.
I haven't.
Well, I'll beg your forgiveness just for a moment, but DeWitt, fascinating story. People can watch the video on our Facebook that goes into a little bit more, but
I will check it out.
Was the man in which he dueled with and sort out was a close confidant of Burr. So Clinton duel is also linked to the Hamilton and Burr duel. So let's see. We have a comment coming up. It's giving Ken's book In DeWitt's Footsteps a shout out. So that's definitely
that's a great book.
We here on the line.
Have it in the gift shop at the Erie Canal Museum.
Yeah, and we have a few copies at Schoharie Crossing, and we are glad that there are some fantastic images in that book of the site as well, since we do have the original Erie Canal. If there's any other questions, if anybody wants to ask away. All right, I want to thank this afternoon as we recognize New York State History Month with a fascinating and wonderful program on the life and times of DeWitt Clinton. Thank you so much for joining us, and we've got some other great programs coming up. You can always get a hold of us, Schoharie Crossing at Parks. Find us on Facebook, find our New York State Parks page. Appreciate it. Thank you very much.